All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the Digital Lunch and Learn with Singularity University London chapter and Consilience Ventures. Together, we're bringing investors and thought leaders to inspire, learn, and build community. I'm Mitesh Soni from the London chapter, and joining me to co-host this session is CEO of Consilience Ventures, Kevin Montserrat. Hello, Kevin.
Hi guys, it's very good to have you all here.
Join the amazing discussion that we're going to have with the one and only Richard Browning. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, thank you very much.
But for those of you that don't know Richard, I'm going to read out his bio because it is exceptional. He's an inventor, engineer, and human flight disruptor. He founded Gravity Industries in March of 2017, which designs, builds, and flies jet suits, pioneering a new era of human flight. Prior to that, he was a Royal Marines reservist for 6 years and an oil trader with BP for 16 years, developing markets and business across countries like Azerbaijan, Mozambique, Russia, and conducting trade relations with many more. So, as you can see, a very accomplished engineer, businessman, and inventor. So hold on to your seats. We got loads to get through. Please use the comment section to join any questions you have along the way, and let's see how we can unpack the story of Gravity Industries. So we're going to start off with a video which encapsulates learning how to fly and run a pioneering business. Tell us about some of those early experiments. It looks like you were whizzing around in a circle and you were about to come off and, fall flat on your face. But was that the case, or how did it all begin?
That was showing some of the origins of this journey. So it started out with that guy doing what's called a planche, which is like a kind of extreme press up without your feet on the ground. It's a sort of ludicrous demonstration of human balance and strength and control. I used to find that kind of stuff really inspiring. And that, combined with my background, which was very much from a family background in the world of aeronautics and innovation and engineering, kind of led me down this road of thinking, well, wouldn't it be really cool, for no business reason whatsoever, just the pure passion of the journey of the question, wouldn't it be cool if you could add to the human form just enough horsepower to be able to fly, but using that brain and that body as the balance system, control system, flight structure? So go absolute minimalist. And then you saw in 2016, I kind of put my money where my mouth was. And I think that's an important part of every entrepreneur's journey, where you go from idea to, on paper, to something physical and tangible. And I literally got hold of a very small gas turbine, an aluminium tube, stuck it on my arm and started playing around with, realizing that actually a bunch of the engineering assumptions around how this shouldn't be possible weren't true. There was no gyroscopic moment. There was no torque. There was no flailing around like a hose pipe, which, if you think about the physics, there shouldn't have been, but it was conventional, kind of wisdom that there should be. And it wasn't ripping my arm off. And I thought, actually, this is very controllable. Even the heat wasn't a problem. And then you saw the multiple learning from ludicrous failures, but always safely, that led me slowly to the point that by November of the same year, so only 8 months or so later, I'd managed to do the very first wobbly-legged flight. And that was the initial journey.
Yeah, and your colleague who very kindly gave you a coffee just now.
My colleague is also my wife.
He seems very supportive of you right now, but in 2016, would she have brought you a cup of coffee when you told her that you were experimenting with putting jet turbines on your wrists?
Well, she knew me well. She knows me well enough to not be entirely surprised. I mean, look, to be fair, I mean, she never stopped me, but she was right to sort of question, like, what is the point of this exactly? And I couldn't really answer that question. I was just sort of passionate about the idea. I was not trying to build an Iron Man suit. That's another, question I get a lot. It did start to dawn on me that it looked a bit like that character as we started to evolve this, but no, it was just genuinely the idea of, I expect most people on this call are probably going to not find this too hard to imagine, that actually when you spot an opportunity in life to do something that's not been done before, that looks really quite, inspiring and exciting, then why not, grasp that opportunity and try and go for it. And I just had this little glimmer of feeling that there was just a chance that A, it was possible, and B, I had enough knowledge and resources and skills myself to just about navigate a pathway of exploration to get to the point of proving the concept. And after that, I just didn't think too much about, I didn't imagine too much further than that point, because I just didn't even know if it was possible. So yeah, she was supportive, did wonder what I was doing. And it's been quite nice as we then, and I will go on to this story, I guess, but the whole then subsequent building the business Gravity and launching it and packaging it, and 3 years later having a successful business out of it, that arguably has been a harder part of the journey. But it's been nice for her to kind of have her faith backed up by the fact that it's now played out like that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to imagine you sitting at BP, trading and moving oil around the world, suddenly come up with this inspirational idea. You're seeing this pathway of inventing, a new era of human flight. Was it a push or a pull? Because for 16 years, you must have been in a pretty cozy position. Everything's working well. It's operationalized. There's not too much to, worry over. And then suddenly you switch completely and follow your passion, not knowing whether it's going to succeed or fail, but you've got an inkling that, after a few experiments, it might go in the right direction. That seems like you have to be either very brave or crazy behind your passions.
Yeah, but I wouldn't look at this in isolation, though. So my whole kind of history has been around not being afraid to kind of take a leap, to an extent, though. Jumping in and trying to join the Royal Marines alongside a busy day job was quite a challenge. I've run a startup successfully. It's still alive and doing really well. In parallel to this. But I've also done a whole load of things that have ended up not working and failing all the time, though. And this is a key mantra of ours here at Gravity, all the time, that my failures, if you like, our failures are always recoverable. So I can get back up again. We can get back up again every time we try something and it doesn't work, and I measure that according to reputation, financially we can get back up again. And then from a safety point of view, clearly that's a very important one for our business. So actually this is just the latest in a long line of unusual, ventures into uncharted territory. I had a really big one when I was in BP that arguably had more impact, but it was a sort of B2B behind closed doors thing. But it was all around understanding how you can track international trade flows in shipping, and realizing that there was a technology that did that really well. And it made, I can say this now because it was over 10 years ago, it made well over $500 million in about 9 months. And it cost me, really BP, about $20,000. And I was strictly told to do it in my free time because no one believed in it and everybody thought it was a bit of a joke. I did it anyway, and it made, like I say, $500 million in about, 9 months. And went on. Now, if you go on any commodity trading floor, everybody uses that technology. I didn't invent it. I just spotted the opportunity first ahead of everybody else. So that arguably was a bigger journey than this one. It's just flying around with a 1,000 horsepower jet suit with my team and I. That's a bit more engaging on social media than a ship tracking platform.
So let's try and understand, what is 1,000 horsepower in terms of comparisons. Is that like a motorcycle? Is it?
Firstly, I should admit that trying to anybody with some physics and engineering background here might be smelling a bit of a rat here. Trying to equate get gas turbine thrust with horsepower is quite difficult. They are not entirely comparable, apples with apples kind of things. But if you make some assumptions and you try and draw the closest possible parallel, then strictly speaking, those suits, there's one sitting in the middle, there's another one there's another one to the side, there's 6 in the background here. Each one is about 1,050 horsepower. In fact, actually tell a lie, that one there is experimental. Luckily hidden around the corner, that's running about 2,500 horsepower. That's a big beast. Really though, let's talk about the standard one. 1,050 horsepower, in real terms from a thrust point of view, that's 144 kilos of thrust. So about 340 pounds or so. But in terms of horsepower, to give that some sort of benchmark, a typical family car is probably about 120 horsepower, 120 horsepower. A decent sports car is probably 250, 300. The Bugatti Veyron famously was 1,000 horsepower. And that's what is weighing there without fuel in at about 24 kilos, and that you walk around with on your back.
So comparatively, that's about four cars. The power of four cars.
Kind of. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it is pretty ludicrous how much power you need to lift a human being with equipment off the ground and hold them there. By just blowing air downwards, you need a ludicrous amount of power. That anybody who's listening to this, and I know some of you have seen and heard this live, will be able to attest to. It is quite a phenomenon to be around.
Yeah, and so you're taking the thrust from these engines, and in the early clip of that video, you're actually pointing it at a hedge. What are you actually prototyping there? Are you measuring how much thrust can push you back? What are you actually doing there?
Or inventing a very expensive leaf blower. So really, it was just to go what really, in hindsight, was a massive step. It was to disregard the rule book, which clearly said be at least 20 feet away from one of these when you start it up, and actually have it strapped to your arm, which sounds like a terrifying thing to do. But having gone through everything that could go wrong and work out how we could protect and fail safe the whole thing, actually take the leap and stick it on your arm and have a little servo controller or a little tiny dial, which allows you to fire it up and down, and a very quick way of turning it off if something went wrong, and the fuel at least some modest distance away from you, which I should cover the fuel, by the way. It's diesel, effectively. We try and use jet fuel, but it's the same product as diesel, so it's as benign as diesel. It's not gasoline. You wouldn't want that really anywhere near you, frankly, because it's so dangerous. But what I was really testing was actually just trying to feel, what was that thrust like? My logic said it's a Newtonian principle here. I'm throwing mass that way, therefore I should go that way, and it should be in relation to the density of what I'm throwing, in other words air, and the speed at which I'm throwing it, which is really quickly. It's coming out at about 1,000 miles an hour when it exits, which is why it makes so much noise. And from a physics perspective, when I lean on a desk that's sitting here, then that is providing an instantaneous force to support me. So if I lean forward with two straight arms on this desk and there's barely any weight on my feet, if I can swap out the instantaneous force that this desk is applying to my hands, then if I can swap that out for what those gas turbines produce, then I should be able to hover. And it was just trying to expand on that principle. And with one engine proving so interesting, so powerful and controllable, it was just a question, as you saw in those clips, of going for more and more and more. And then it was a question of working out where the dickens do you put them all? Do you put them all on your arms? Well, I tried that, as you saw, and that was just horrible. And it ended up settling out that you put one on each leg and two on each arm, and that just about worked, although we then went on to greatly improve that. It was, how do you marry up the human mind and body with that horsepower? That was the kind of fundamental challenge.
And so the approach here, did you have any sort of architectural drawings of these jets on your arms and your feet, and you drawing out what would happen if there was this much thrust going, doing some calculations, or was it more experimental, trying, iterating, and then seeing what works? Because it looks highly unstable if you've got these jets around. I'm surprised that you don't go off like a rocket into one direction. How do you get the stability, and how do you get the control?
So I had a hunch that the human brain would be able to deal with this. If you just stop for a moment and think about the following challenge. Imagine covering one eye. Imagine walking out into an uneven field at night and then go run across that field. Probably one time in 10 you might fall over, I would concede. But actually, isn't that an amazing balancing effort? You've got one eye with no depth perception, scanning in real time an uneven surface you've never seen before, and relying on feedback from the soles of your feet hitting the uneven surface. And you're doing all that as you run at 10 miles an hour. That's ridiculous, right? That shouldn't work. So when I thought about, well, how should it work if I have a wigwam, a teepee, tent poles of thrust in a sort of series of triangles coming down from my body, from my arms and from my back and my legs, which all provide this, I'm struggling to sort of wave my arms around suitably, but that sort of tent-like support. That sounds like a much more stable structure in concept than walking, which is a very top-heavy, wobbly process, let alone running. So I kind of thought, in essence, then that should work. And all I was really doing is proving that hypothesis. But then again, to really reinforce this point, if you'd never seen a bicycle before and I handed you one and you held onto it and then you let go of it and it fell on the floor, but I tried to convince you that don't worry, once you sit on top of it as a top heavy lump and then start pedaling furiously and go quickly, it'll be even more even more stable. But it doesn't even hold itself up. That all sounds ludicrous as well. But again, it's because both of the running and the cycling examples are shining a light on just how capable the human brain is at balancing top heavy things. So I kind of had a feeling that we would make a brilliant flight computer. And again, if you look at all the social media, all the clips, even the stuff we put out this week, it doesn't look real. And we train people to do that in a day sometimes. And what I've really uncovered is really, to be honest, just how elegant the human brain is at balance. And I'm personally saying that as somebody who doesn't really skateboard, rollerblade, ski or snowboard at all very well. I'm really bigging up how brilliant the human brain is at learning to balance. So that first step was just realizing that the thrust was controllable. And then it was that question of how do you give the brain as much helping hand by assembling the thrust in the right kind of way for the brain, a bit like a bicycle, to be able to adapt nice and quickly. And that was the journey, really.
So that sounds fascinating, and it seems like you have a very good principle for jet propulsion, human flight, and much like in the early days of commercial flying, pilots would fly the plane, they would direct it, and they would take off and land. Now all of that is done through autopilot. So is it conceivable that sometime in the future you take all of that logic, you compress it into a chip, and a lot of those jet engines could be controlled and supervised via some software, perhaps even on your mobile phone, which would be quite daring.
Yeah, no, very much. I mean, I had to always be the guardian of sticking to the original ethos on this journey, because actually the so-called easy option nowadays, and it just shows how far technology has come, is to build a big box, stick a load of jet engines all around the edge, put a seat on top and a big start button. And you just sit there like a dumb human and press go. And then a little computer will then fire up all the engines, use a Mavic, drone gyro to control them all, vector them all, right? And then rise up and then flare them a little bit, throttle them back and hover there. And then you just put in your postcode and off you go, right? You just built a really terrifying re-engineered helicopter that uses jet engines. For two reasons, I wanted to stay away from that. One, I actually think that's really dangerous, because if that fails, it can fail to the upside. In other words, it could just lock the vectors and keep going. And you're only going to know about it as you keep accelerating through 500 feet, thinking this was now a really bad idea. One of the good things about how we fly is it is like being at the handlebars of a motorbike. Yes, you can open the throttle, but you have to choose to do that. A motorbike will default, if you like, to if it goes wrong, then it'll stop or fall over, right? And it'll only hurt you if you happen to have been doing stupid speed at that time. In a similar kind of way, if the analogy works, with us, it's only as dangerous as you're flying high or fast. And we tend to not really do that. Even over water, we don't go particularly high. It can only ever fail to the downside. And I always thought there was something elegant and hopefully inspiring about having the whole system as minimalist as possible. I think we've got about as small as you can get with current technology to something you literally just put on. That packs into 2 check-in suitcases, which is why we've done 100 events, around the world. Because you literally, in the old days, and I mean 2 months ago, would be able to fly anywhere and literally get it out the suitcase and fly within 10 minutes. I wanted to keep it as small and as simple as possible. As soon as you start building in computers and gyros and structure and arms and all the rest of it, you just built a big, probably less inspiring thing that when people see it fly, they will say, oh, look, there's a human strapped to a flying machine. Whereas when people see us fly, it tends to be, oh my God, there's a human flying. They almost don't notice sometimes that you're even wearing anything particularly. That was why, those are the 2 reasons why: safety and the sort of inspiration, raw essence of the project. But you're absolutely right. You could eventually just make it so you just put in your zip code and it'll fly you around. But I'd probably vote for doing that with a helicopter rather than this.
So it sounds really exciting. Are you now training ordinary consumers to fly? Is there somewhere that you're do you have to have any previous experience or?
No, so I think before the lockdown, we got to about 50 clients over the last year or so. We train them here in the UK and also in Camarillo. There's a private air terminal in Camarillo, just outside of LA, which we train people at, and we're building more locations as well. So essentially, and again, this is all on our YouTube at Gravity Industries. You can see lots of clients there training. You get clipped into like a sort of top rope as if you're going to rock climb, and that stops you falling over. You literally can't go lower than knee height. and you start with the engines on very low and realize that if you point them off to one side, you kind of get blown the other way. And your brain, again, like a bicycle, your brain starts realizing the action and reaction. And then there's this wonderful moment as the power levels increase that you can increase them. You get this moment where the clients look up and grin like an idiot and get it and never think about it again. As the lockdown eases, we're gradually going to work through, I think, 200 people on the waiting list now from around the world who want to come and do this. And
how long is that waiting list? When does that get processed? Is that over a year, or is that talking business now, one of our big kind of money earners was doing events. So I sort of mentioned before, we topped out actually at 103 events in 30 countries in 3 years. And that was great because most of those events paid pretty good money, and it was a great way of testing the equipment and building a network and hanging out with people like you guys, for instance, in those 2 events I mentioned. I do suspect crowd gathering, mass event sort of things. I mean, not that they're huge, but some of them are quite exclusive groups. I still think that's going to be a tough thing to see happen until this time next year or so. So actually client training is going to switch as one of our main areas. And we're hopefully going to set up a flight training area, which will be able to get a lot more people through it, actually at the Goodwood estate where, the motor racing and Festival of Speed and stuff takes place. We know those guys. Some of them have trained with us as well. And we're hopefully going to have that as a more regular location where we could get through people a lot more efficiently. Because to be honest, we used to fit in client training in amongst events and in amongst our own R&D. People seem to love it, but we didn't really focus on it as a major thing. But there's so much demand now that, we're going to hopefully get through most of those people over the summer. So I have one more question. What's it like to go 86 miles per hour in a jet suit?
Yeah, that was fun. So the background of that, we've done 2 world records now. In fact, they're stuck up on the wall somewhere. At least a couple of years ago, they asked us to do it, and we set a 32-mile-an-hour record, which wasn't particularly spectacular, but we'd never tried before, and that was never even flown over water before when we did that. And then, yes, indeed, last November, where they asked us to come back, the Guinness World Record folks, and we set 86, so 135 kilometers an hour. That was using a leg wing as well, so we're starting to experiment with getting the body flatter as you fly, and that's a whole nother conversation around adding wings and things, which is fascinating. That was pretty epic. I mean, the world is whipping by at quite a pace underneath you when you're doing that. And again, I wouldn't want to do that over anything other than water. And even water looks pretty hard at that speed. That was an amazing feeling. It's hard to put into words what it's like as you vector back and you start to feel that airflow lift you, and you start to point more and more of the thrust backwards to accelerate forwards, and using the airflow as the lift rather than blowing air down to lift you. So like moving the nozzles backwards on a Harrier or an F-35. Yeah, that is an amazing feeling. You can feel the acceleration. You can feel the air thundering past you, and you can actually start to bank aerodynamically as well, like a mini jet fighter. That is quite a phenomenal experience. And also knowing there's no guidebook or rule book on this, you're literally doing it live, going, "Oh, that didn't work very well. Right, what about this?" And you're moving your body, and it's just phenomenal.
Excellent. That is just absolutely fantastic. Kevin, I know you had a whole bunch of questions around venture and getting capital raised, and then we've got a video towards the end as well.
It reminds me what I see when we speak to you is I see a kid who has enough experience to be able to do what kid would want to do, but with the knowledge. It's quite amazing to see, actually. So if we were to kind of take the angle of how do you turn a crazy idea, into a sustainable business. At the beginning, it sounds like, well, can we fly? You have explained how you have tested and how you had de-risked, your life and the project, and then you went on and you thought, oh, actually, there's something more than a kid, than a toy in my garden here. You realized that you could do something much more than, much bigger than just flying around, if you like. So how did you, what was your thinking process? What were you thinking? You were thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go down to the road of selling, military applications, or you thought, okay, well, maybe there are some entertaining applications. What was your thinking process, and how did you even get funded? Because right at the outset, most entrepreneurs would think of, market research and analyzing, try to assess the potential of your business and how you quantify the market of what you do. And what you did is you went on, you built it, and then you discovered the business model as you were developing the business. So tell us a bit more about, that, and how you then got funded and then it went on into build what is Gravity today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I do concede it's been an unusual journey. So you're very right. You mentioned de-risking. So yes, I admit completely that my 16 years in the oil industry was very much around building, a financial kind of stability, if you like, boring things like paying off most of the mortgage and things like that. Because I experienced as a kid one of those entrepreneurial journeys that my father went on, and it ultimately ended up very badly. So I knew that it's one thing to have this, read a Richard Branson book. I love Richard Branson. I've met him a few times, but read one of those books and think, right, I've just got to have a crazy idea and never give up. Well, that's really dangerous, because I've seen what happens when that doesn't, or unfurl. And this is why I said right at the beginning of this conversation around making failure survivable, because as I'm sure most of you guys know, doing anything step out, entrepreneurial, innovative, or whatever is spending most of the time failing. And if you can't keep getting back up and keep trying, keep rolling that dice, then yeah, it's going to be difficult. You're not going to hit a home run first time, to mix too many metaphors. So I built that kind of solidity, if you like, and that bought me some mental and a little bit of financial space. And I spent £50,000 or so, much of which could have been recovered if I had not succeeded in what I was doing. And I did it all alongside a day job. So I did it all in evenings and weekends, because I didn't even give up my day job. That gave me the sort of mental freedom to think, look, if it doesn't all work, I haven't really told anybody about it anyway. I'll just put it down in the box marked other failed ideas. And frankly, this is one of those things that would be really embarrassing if it didn't work. Because what are you doing? I mean, do you think you're like a 10-year-old jumping around in a farmyard with jet engines strapped to you? I mean, shall I flap off a church spire next? I mean, but you're very right. And I get asked a lot, what was the hardest part about this journey? And, I can talk about where do you put the engines and the engineering challenge, but actually, arguably, the hardest part of the journey was after that November point when I did that first flight. It's sitting back going, oh my God, now what? Because this works. And I know I can see this is just so crude, and I can see so many ways to make it better. But how do I go from spending, 50 grand or so of my own money to properly funding this? I don't have the money to really take this any further. But judging by the half a dozen people that had come and seen this in this little grotty farmyard where we used to train, people had lost their minds. I mean, they just drove in and said, look, do you want to come and see what I've been doing the weekend? And you take off and hover in front of them and land again. And literally, people they would often just have sort of tears in their eyes and just give me a hug and not be able to speak. And it was like, well, what the hell is that about? So we started to form this idea that, well, we should show the world this, but rather than a grainy YouTube clip that you just throw out there and enjoy 5 minutes of probably ridicule, like, why have you done that? I started to hatch this idea. Should we try and package this in a way inside a wrapper of a brand? And this is an oil trader speaking that knows nothing about PR and marketing and all that sort of stuff. Should we kind of do that? So I went out and spoke to a few people. This is the key thing. And I ended up taking on a guy who built built decent amount of money in the world of PR, marketing, and branding. And he came up with Gravity, which I think is still a brilliant. It was I don't take credit for that. Although his first idea was Thrust. I know the speed record car had that name, but anyway, it doesn't really work as well as Gravity, I don't think. And he came up with a slightly dark and sinister-ish sort of brand and feel, and trying to be sophisticated and all that sort of stuff. And then I think the key win was during that winter, we worked out that why don't we try and launch with 2 brands that will help catapult this towards pioneering a new era of human mobility versus idiot trying to blow himself up, because the British press are sometimes unforgiving of new things, let's put it mildly. So guess what 2 brands we went with? Wired and Red Bull. And those 2 brands were willing to do, they helped fund the films, and there was no exchange of ownership of anything. We just all had a big kind of love in of let's enjoy the content. And in April 2017, literally around April Fool's Day, we launched these films and they went wild. And I think they got shared. I think we ended up with working out through our PR firm that we also took on to try and help kind of push it in the right direction. I think we hit 1 billion impressions within a week. And the fun thing was, a lot of those thought it was an April Fool's joke. And then all those people ended up realizing about a week later that this isn't going away and it wasn't an April Fool's joke. So we got like a re-look from everybody, like, oh my God, it is real. And then I got the call from Chris Anderson to go and do TED, which was amazing because I've been a huge TED, supporter and enthusiast for ages. And he said, do you want to come and fly it there? And I'd never even flown it outside of this farmyard. And so, and this is getting to the funding. This has a funding relevance to it as well, this story. I worked out how to put all this stuff in a case, turned up at Heathrow and had to repack all the suitcases because they said, look, we don't mind you taking jet engines on a plane, which is quite funny because I just had to gamble, see if they would be up for it. But my suitcases weighed way too much, so I had to spread them amongst a load of suitcases on Terminal 5's floor, which was funny, not funny at the time. But what I haven't said is that on the way to go and do TED, I took an invitation from the Drapers. So it was Adam Draper, who runs Boost VC in San Francisco, San Mateo specifically. I didn't really know who they were. They just sounded like a lovely bunch of people. They were really inspired by what they'd seen online. And they said, can you come and fly at our kind of VC open day? And I thought, you know what, why don't I go and test it there, get it out of a suitcase and see if it flies. And then before I go and stand in front of 21 media groups and Richard Branson, Al Gore, and the whole TED crowd in Vancouver and make a fool of myself, at least let's just test it. So I did the flight in their car park, really not thinking about it other than, oh my God, I'm going to crash and burn, literally. Maybe not literally, but in front of the TED crowd. And anyway, I did fail to start the first time. I try and forget about that. But then within seconds, it started, flew around, landed. Adam rushed up to me, followed by a more elderly gentleman, more mature gentleman than him, more mature years. And they both loved it. And it turned out that was his father, Tim Draper. And he handed me $100 bill. I could even go and grab this if you want. He handed me this $100 bill and made a bit of a joke about how, I cleaned out his parking lot and this is all very funny and it was brilliant. Then they went away for literally 30 seconds and I was still wearing all the engines cooling, thinking, God, thank God that worked. I've got a pack for TED now. And they walked back up and said, this is genuinely the most awesome thing we've ever seen. The whole VC ethos, that family dynasty, because I think Tim Draper's father was a VC investor and I think they're the longest VC investor family in the Valley and all this stuff. They literally said, our ethos has always been be your own superhero, go beyond, never give up, go to those extreme lengths. And I mean, Tim's investment history speaks for itself. You manifest that, we have to be involved in this. How about $500,000 for 10%? And my engines are still cooling. I'm still standing there thinking how I'm going to pack this for Vancouver. So I quickly put my trader hat on and thought, oh, geez, I've got to haggle. So I thought, well, okay, well, how about £500,000 for 10%? By the way, we'd only formed this company about 6 weeks earlier, of which I'd taken £100,000 of investment from the guy who helped set up Gravity. And anyway, we ended up haggling to $650,000 because that turned out at the time to be about £500,000. And we shook the deal and signed the deal on that same $100 bill, which is stuck in my lab entrance. And that was the one and only VC investment we took. So that was not a bad return for the guy who put 100 grand in for 20%, 22%. About 6 weeks earlier. We got valued in that car park at event one at $6.5 million from one demo. So I started to think, this is interesting. If we get in front of people, don't really promise anything and just demonstrate what we can do and metaphorically turn around and start walking away, we just glance over your shoulder and see who's following you, see who's interested. That's a really interesting way of polling what effect we're having on people and what this business is. And this business, it started to occur, is about entertainment. It's about inspiration. It's about bringing a spectacle. And then you take a step back and think, well, what does Formula One and IndyCar and NASCAR and DTM and all these other things do? You can't go to the shops in an IndyCar. And yet it's was until two months ago, a multi-billion dollar industry. And you start to think, actually, there is a place for entertainment, inspiration, creating content, building personalities where there's a human involved in the technology, whether that technology is holding a tennis racket or golf club or driving a car or flying a plane. Why don't we just go and sample a population all over the world about doing these events, which, by the way, we get paid for, and use that as a huge market survey in hindsight of this technology we've invented and start to poll what people want to see. And the conclusion was they want to see more suits, more personalities, more interesting people racing these. And that's why we're building the race series. Now, in parallel, indeed, we've got a whole load of military stuff going on. We've got all the client training as well, but it all kind of connects. So that was a long-winded explanation of the VC story, which is not a normal VC process that we've been through.
It's actually way more than the VC story. It's actually quite impressive that actually what you managed to do is selling a dream to somebody who really had the ability to afford, 10% for 6.5 million, via valuation, when there was very much nothing proven about the market apart from the fact that effectively there's tons of money in entertainment, right? So it's actually quite impressive. So where does that lead us to now? Where do you think this is all going right now? Now you are basically financially stable. The company is growing. You have more viewers online. You are growing your YouTube channel. You are growing your brand equity. What stops you to create a new sport?
So just to sort of reinforce that, so just let's say pre-COVID, if that's going to become a thing, we were sitting on 103 events, 30 countries, team of 7 pilots, a wider team of 12 or so, a huge network around the world of wonderful people involved in this as well. We've trained 50 clients. We've got military engagements in the US, UK, and even Singapore. We've got an amazing R&D kind of catalog of technology that's not slowing down. We've patented everything. So we've applied the same exploratory attitude that we've had to technology as we do to our business model. We're not afraid to go off and try something and then come back again and decide if we want to do more of it. So before COVID, we were thinking, right, the racing is where it's at. We'd self-funded a race in Bermuda that was due to happen in March. We had a load of sponsors, load of stuff. It's sitting out there ready to go. Who knows, right? It could be a year until we're allowed to go and really do that. So the entertainment thing, I still think it's very valid, but it's probably going to be a little paused until we can all go and gather at events. Absolutely create content. That's not a problem. I think as you've heard, we've got a lot of demand for people wanting to come and actually experience this kind of personally. But we're starting to think really creatively about how do we drive that entertainment and content creation thing in a COVID environment. And actually we're looking at a slightly novel idea of, instead of touring around the world doing races at venues and where sponsors are excited by the content and the eyeballs on that activation, why not focus on our home market and actually go to all these locations, iconic kind of tourist locations, which have got no tourists because you're not allowed to go there. And why don't we, with their permission, run a mini race series in those locations, create content, I suppose, keep alive that cinematic, beautiful destination for that location, for the tourist industry, but also create a load of content at the same time and help that location out whilst they're not generating revenue. So that's one of the examples of the sort of unusual, innovative kind of ways we're trying to adjust to this environment. But if nothing else, we've been cautious enough to keep a decent cash reserve, and we've got no debt in the company, and we own all our own assets as well, that we can actually go and just focus on a lot of R&D and a lot of the military work in the meantime. So when we are allowed back out, we will emerge with some quite ridiculous technology. I mean, some of what's sitting behind me there, which we've never shown anybody yet, these suits, not only more powerful, but one of the ludicrous headlines is, rather than taking about 45 seconds to start up from cold, which I never think is that bad, the latest ones take 10 seconds. So you can actually just literally be talking like this, wearing a suit, and then within 10 seconds, I could fly away. So from a sort of cinematic, appealing to the superhero fan perspective, we can deliver something quite remarkable, I think. So we're just going to have to keep being adaptive and keep working with the ebb and flow. No one really knows how long all of this kind of shutdown is going to carry on for. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes, really.
I'm thinking of education here. The army, with project of bloodhounds, and such, the fastest cars on the planet, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of money going into educating the next generations of engineers. So have you kind of considered kind of going to schools and say that, because that is so entertaining, that you are actually, educating, the next generations of entrepreneurs and the next generation of engineers, certainly, about, with something which is actually quite exciting, because all kids on the planet want to know how to fly, right? So you have the best hook to get people interested in engineering, which has, a bigger purpose than, I guess for the schools at least, right?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of STEM events around the world. Often when we turn up to do a commercial event in a country, we'd then try and do a flight or a talk in the local school. So I was in Florida in the start of the year doing an event there, and we did a big kind of talk for the local high school and stuff. So I've done an arena with 3,000 kids, I think it was, and actually flew in, landed, and did a kind of keynote about innovation and stuff. So yes, its power to inspire young people is pretty potent. I think, to be very practical about it, as still, a relatively young company, we have to have a portfolio of activity, some of which obviously has to generate money for R&D and to grow the company. What we're really looking for, and I'll throw it out there, are companies that want to drive a STEM, I suppose, CSR agenda, but maybe their product line is not exactly inspiring or exciting. You fly in and land a jet suit at a school, as we've done when you're invited, I'm hasten to add, and you just literally get surrounded by children, and it's brilliant. And I've left GoPros on my head before running or with my other pilots when they've done it, and you are literally bombarded by the most inspiring, excitable kind of questions. We can definitely do that. We are literally, we are very limited on our bandwidth to be able to just relentlessly do that. So if we have corporates who want to help grow that will be interesting. Other than that, we've got lots of STEM resources on our website. We've got a series of PDFs, for instance, that talk about the various different STEM aspects to what we do. So you're very right to pick up on it. It's a challenge for a small company to get the balance right of how much time you can devote towards that. But yeah, we get bombarded all the time by young people wanting to be part of this.
I will just play the videos, the last videos to show where we are today with Gravity.
But yeah, we get bombarded all the time by young people wanting to be part of this.
I will just play the videos, the last videos to show where we are today with Gravity.
Yeah, so again, within the limitations of Zoom, this is sitting on our YouTube. This is supposed to be a whistle-stop, no attention span tour of some of the places we've been and where we've flown and what we've done. Some of them kind of more bizarre than others, but all of them pretty fun. Frankly ludicrous. If you show me some of these things as training clients, for instance, some of these things, when I was falling over in that farmyard, that would have been pretty amazing to think this is where it's got to.
So I have a question. Richard, your lab looks absolutely exciting and fun. I'd love it if you could pick out 3 objects from there, maybe even that $100 bill. and what does it mean for you? I'm sure there's tons of history in that lab and lots of special interest there.
I tell you what, I can get the $100 bill. I don't know how well this is going to come across in Zoom, but it is sitting in a special frame. So you can see there, actually, if I'm looking at my own thing there, that says 650K for 10%. If you can, is that even the right way around? It's probably that way around, actually. Look, 650K for 10%. I don't know if you can see that very well. And then on there, it says, thanks for clearing out my parking lot. Oh, it's all backwards, isn't it? Anyway, I was most impressed to seeing a $100 bill because I hadn't really seen them very much. So I was mostly quite enthralled by being given that. That was the first revenue we ever generated as well. I'd never really thought about that. So yeah, that was a remarkable week, frankly, to be doing that. Then going to TED and in Vancouver, there was the most amazing collection of people. I ended up meeting Adam Savage there, the guy from Mythbusters, for people who remember him. And just tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, Adam, I love what you do. He had already seen online what we'd done, and he just became my ground crew because I did the whole thing solo. I designed the suit so I could even administer it all myself. Nowadays, you also have a nice big team. But if you look at the original TED Vancouver clip, you can see a ginger guy with a yellow bomber jacket standing in front of me, being my ground crew, and that's Adam Savage. And it's not even mentioned in the film coverage. So yeah, it was an unusual week, that.
Well, that's phenomenal. Any questions from anyone?
I have a question. What would be the thing that nobody really knew about you online or can't find about you online, Richard? What is that thing that make you, start things that most people would think, well, let's not do that? What is it what's the biggest driver? And
what that drives me, it is that experience in my childhood, which I was living around somebody who had gone from a day job to following their own entrepreneurial journey, and constantly sort of teasing themselves with, wow, it's going to be amazing and big. And he was pioneering something in the bicycle industry. Actually, this is my father, and doing something which we're all guilty of, all of us entrepreneurs, innovators, anybody trying to build or grow something, you're constantly fueling your own enthusiasm by imagining where you're going to get to, imagining the mountaintop and what it's going to be like when you get there. And I lived around that, and I kind of constantly absorbed, wow, it's going to be amazing. We're going to get there. It's going to be awesome. It's a big success. Think of the money that's going to come from that. And it never quite happened. And then it really went downhill, and then it ultimately ended in real tragedy. So if I get a bit Oprah about me for a second, I'm clearly trying to make good. I think I'm trying to make good as many of those entrepreneurial journeys where you have a ludicrous idea, drag it through thick and thin, get to the other end, achieve it, and everything will be fine. And if I keep climbing enough of those mountains, I'll undo what unfortunately I experienced when I was a kid. I suspect that's probably what's going on very deep. It doesn't trouble me, but if I do that own self-analytics, I think that's probably where some of my kind of drive comes from. Otherwise, why the hell did I join the Royal Marines alongside being an oil trader? I mean, it was ludicrous hard work. At a Friday night to get off the train and go and be literally beaten around in freezing cold and wet and be exhausted, not sleep for 2 days. And, why would I do that? I asked that question a lot while I was doing it, but I never gave up and got to the end of it. So I think that's where it comes from, but I don't know. I suppose it's served me quite well, but yeah, I would concede it's not entirely normal to have that kind of mindset, I suppose. I'm not very good at sitting still on a beach, let's put it that way.
Richard, you've been absolutely phenomenal. It's been hugely inspirational for all of us.
This is the end of our Future of Venture Capital series. We've talked about space tech investments. We've talked about impact investment. We've talked about investing in AI. We've covered a lot of different topics throughout this series, and it is very actually good that we managed to end up this Future of Venture Capital series with an inspiring entrepreneur who started with a dream and who ended up doing something sustainable, which is now inspiring and hopefully will continue to inspire the next generations of engineers. So I can only say thank you so much.